why do you think Rome decided to transition from a republic to an empire? And if the empire is when things were at its greatest, what's wrong with the empire?
Well, I guess the Germans wouldn't have liked the empire very much. I think that's how you have to consider is how they conduct themselves abroad. And there's good things and there's bad things about that, right? Like as because I'm somebody that likes Rome a lot. But if you want to look at why it got to where it got to, the last 100 years, so 133 to 31 is what's known as the Roman Civil War. It's upheaval for like 150 years. So Julius Caesar is kind of the last person to step in, and then he's assassinated in 44 BC. And in his will, they read his will, and he actually adopts this guy named Octavius to be his son, which is something Romans could do after you died. You could actually adopt somebody and give them your name and your titles and all those things like that after death. So then Augustus is actually the guy that established Octavian, who will become Augustus, is actually the guy that establishes the new thing. So people have been through civil war for 100 years. They're just looking for peace, and that's what Augustus brings them. So after pursuing the assassins of Julius Caesar, after taking out another political enemy that we know as Mark Antony, Augustus Caesar says, "I'm going to retire," and I think he does this because he's a brilliant psychologist in this. Because people then demand, "No, Augustus, you can't leave us. You have to stay in power," and they give
Mm.
him the title of first citizen. Later on, they're going to give him the title of imperator, which is where emperor comes from. So he gets that position because he fills a power vacuum and people demand he stay. And then he decides what is going to be kind of the lineage after me. And the thing that helps him is he lives into his 70s. He takes over power in his early 30s and lives into his 70s. So by the time he's dead, there's not many people living that remember what it's like to live in a republic. They just remember
Yeah.
what it's like to live under Augustus. So he then establishes how are we going to find the next person?
Isn't that crazy that that's human nature? That's
Yeah.
crazy. I mean, this is what we saw during the COVID pandemic, for example. I mean, anything to keep us safe. We'll do anything. Just give us peace, give us stability, give us safety. We'll give up everything. We'll give up everything we've ever known. I would imagine during that time when they were basically crowning Augustus emperor, which is kind of like a new king, right? You're just putting a shiny different name on it. I would imagine there was probably some dissent there. There was probably people saying, no, 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 no. This is not the way we want to remain a republic, or we want more freedoms, and we don't want to live under kings. We don't want to live under. But that, of course, was squashed, and the majority won out, or the powerful won out, and decided that no, we're going to go in this. We're going to give up these freedoms, or give up. I mean, I don't know how free the Romans were under the republic, or how we could. But it sounds like it was better than the empire being under an emperor. Sounds
Yeah,
like there was a little bit more say.
yes and no. Like I guess people do have a lot more say during the Republic, but there's a lot more money in the early Empire. It's after like 117 when they start going crazy what they're doing with their money that things get bad. But if you want to look at it like one of the early things, well, first of all, when Julius Caesar takes over power, he replaces most of the Senate with people that actually support him. So people that
Mm,
would have had a problem with this have already been removed. His
mhm.
main enemies leave Italy. Pompey the Great is going to be killed in Egypt, not by Caesar, but by the Ptolemaic king. His two biggest enemies actually commit suicide because they don't want to face Caesar. Um, so you have this kind of the people that would have had something to say about it are for the most part gone. You do have some enemies that are left, like the most famous orator Marcus Tullius Cicero, that Augustus is going to have him killed. So after really taking power, Augustus starts slowly removing the people that have something to say against him. So a lot of the opposition has been removed early on, but he starts removing that opposition later on. The people want stability, which they're getting. So it's not hard to see like how you can easily get there.
Yeah. And now, I mean, nowadays, I don't think you can easily take people out, like actually murder them. But what we are seeing, I mean, it happens. They tried, I think, with Donald Trump, right? They certainly
Well, if
got
you
a
watch
shot
House of
in.
Cards, it seems like a lot more of that happens, right?
Yeah. But now what we're dealing with, what we're seeing, which is kind of similar, would be like the misinformation campaigns online. Like, oh, we got to silence and censor people. We can't let their views and their opinions get out there. Anything we don't agree with, we're just not going to let people see. That seems to be the tactic now in order to oppress any sort of opposition to whatever it is that the establishment wants to do. Just silence it online.
And I think
That's one of the tactics.
that's the interesting part about it, Kim, is I think it's good and it's bad because I think if you look at like later on when the empire fell, I think if people had the ability to speak like they could now, at least in some aspects, then maybe they could have done something about it. But I think also you look at how controlled most of our information is. They don't do assassinations in public anymore. I know, though, we did have an attempt on Trump not too long ago. It's done through the court of public opinion, whether it be with law
Mhm.
cases, whether it be with what you've had to say. They kind of unperson you in a lot of ways. And technology, I think, is very scary in that way. Whereas, hundreds of years ago, somebody would have raised a military force. Now it's more of they're just going to cancel you online and it's all over.
Yeah. Yeah, they just remove you from every platform. They call you a conspiracy theorist. They slap these labels on people to make it so that they're delegitimized and people don't listen to them. And they're, oh, you're part of the crazy camp if you listen to that person. And so they've kind of figured out ways to do character assassinations, right? And censor people online, which sounds, it's a very similar tactic. I mean, what's really frightening about all of this is what we see, which is why we should study history, right? It's why we should have these conversations, is because we see that human nature doesn't actually change. We just kind of we shift with the times what resources we use to basically do the same exact thing. So, yeah, the Romans didn't have the internet, so they weren't doing things the way we do them now. But, history, I think I heard you say when I was listening to some of your shows, history doesn't repeat itself. What is it that
It rhymes.
what's the phrase? It rhymes. Yeah. So it's not going to be exact, it's just going to be extremely similar, and that's what we're seeing. And maybe things are even sped up right now with the US empire because of the internet, how fast the world moves now. We're moving at such a faster pace than the Romans could possibly. I mean, we could fly, and we have internet, so things are a lot different. Um so but what is the problem with the Roman Empire then? I mean, what is it that what is so I mean, obviously, I think people would rather live in a time when they can have more voting. And I'm going to pose a question that sounds like I'm almost for dictatorships, and I'm not. But this has been one of the debates that's been going on in today's era. And that debate is, you look at China, and China doesn't have the same bureaucracy that the United States has. And because of that lack of bureaucracy, because of their ability to just make decisions almost like the Roman Empire, it sounds like doing something very similar to what the Roman Empire did when they switched over to the empire, right? Which is they're rapidly becoming prosperous, and they're not dealing with bureaucracy. They're not having a lot of infighting. It's one person kind of making all of these big decisions. And that seems to be really working for them. It sounds like it also really worked for the Roman Empire. I'm not saying that I want to go into a world of, dictatorship or autocrats or anything like that, but there clearly is. I mean, I think that we can't have serious conversations about democracy, about preserving democracy or a republic, if we're not willing to at least understand the benefits that do come from sort of an autocratic style government, which is things get done a lot faster, more efficiently. And if you've got the right autocrat, I guess, you might end up prosperous. You might end up with some benefit there. Does
I
that?
guess you have to look at it, I guess, from the perspective of, like, number one, might doesn't always make right. Like, to actually, like, take people's ability to live and create, I think, can be hard. But I think also it's understanding where these things go eventually. And I guess it takes hundreds of years to get there, but you eventually you're going to have more than one powerful autocrat that wants to be in power. And that's what happens in the third century. And that's what actually kills the empire, because what would happen is, after the death of Commodus, he's the son of Marcus Aurelius. People were really not happy with Commodus because he was often fighting in the gladiatorial games and things like that, rather than actually ruling his empire. So he's assassinated by the Praetorian Guard, which is a whole nother conversation of the Praetorian Guard behind emperors, and how scared you should be for your life. But what would happen is it became who could raise the most powerful army. And I think that's the problem of where this eventually leads you. So you have what's called the barrack emperors in the third century. Barracks comes from the word military barracks. And what would happen is the guy that paid their army more would be the next emperor. So in the third century, you have around 47 different guys claim to be emperor. I know there's some people that say it's more, some that say it's less, but you have around 47 different emperor claimants. The problem is this destroys the currency. And I think that's the thing you have to worry about is when you don't have a currency, it's very hard to have a country anymore. And
Yeah.
by the time you get to the 270s, Emperor Aurelian's silver coin is actually bronze. There's no silver in it. And you just have money that can't buy anything. People don't trust the money anymore. So you have a black market that pops up because they don't want to use actual money. They'd rather trade. But then you also have people stop trusting the currency. So that's going to hurt you for not just trade within your country, but trade outside of your country. So as much as sure it might be good for a little bit, eventually you're going to see other powerful autocrats try and use force in order to raise themselves, and you have to pay the people that are behind you, or they're not going to be behind you very long. That's
Hmm.
how you destroy a country.
Right. And maybe in today's era, it wouldn't be necessarily raising an army. I mean, I do think that obviously, if you've got the military behind you, you're going to remain in power. If you lose the military, you're not going to be in power. I think that holds true even in our current governmental system. We just haven't really seen that in action. But it's certainly true.
When the
But
technology side of it is scary as well, because we we have technology like the Romans never could have imagined. So I think we are headed into something. While history does rhyme in a lot of ways, we're headed into something they could never imagine.
Yeah, that's true. So maybe instead of even an army, you don't need to have the actual military, but you can have the tech guys, the tech.
Yes.
Well, and that's how we're even fighting wars now in this way with surveillance and AI and drones, and we're kind of going in that direction. So no, I understand that there would be, when you've got an autocratic situation, then you're going to have multiple people rise up and say, well, I want to be the autocrat, so I'm going to do what it takes. And in this era, it would maybe be getting the billionaires behind you. You don't necessarily need the military, but if you get the billionaires behind you and they're the ones pushing forward for you to be the person. I mean, we're kind of watching this happen within the Democratic Party right now. I mean, where
Yes.
was the vote? Where was the democracy? Where, like, Kamala was just crowned. I mean, that's what
Mhm.
was, they cooed Joe Biden, they got him out of there, and they crowned Kamala. Even though the public didn't want her, they said they didn't want her back in 2020 when she was running in the Democratic primary, continued to not want her as she was vice president of the United States. Her ratings were very low, lower than Joe Biden's, which was very difficult to do. And then but they crowned her anyway. So it's whoever was behind her. And that didn't take the military, right? There wasn't any military, I think, that was like, uh, surrounding Kamala Harris and saying this is the person that we wanted to power, but it was some other force that we're dealing with. So I think it's very similar. During the Roman Empire, maybe it was the military, and if you had the military's backing, then you could be the next emperor. But today we got to figure out who is that dark force that is so powerful that they're able to just crown Kamala. The
But I think it
billionaires, or is it the tech? Is it the deep state? Like, who is it?
I think a big part of this is so the Praetorian Guard comes around under the first Emperor Augustus, and they're responsible early on for protecting the emperor. That's their main purpose. They're this elite military unit that all they do is protect the emperor. They could carry weapons inside the walls of Rome, which no one else could do. So they have this very particular role and particular things they can do. The third emperor, Caligula, they make a big move and they actually kill him after a 4-year reign. And what ends up happening then is the Praetorian Guard doesn't just become a group that protects the emperor. They start to establish themselves almost like a Roman deep state in a lot of ways. And the most
Hmm.
powerful man in Rome isn't typically the emperor. It's what's called the Praetorian prefect, the guy who's actually in control of the Praetorian Guard. And they decide, if they don't like somebody that's in power, they're going to take them out. And it happens many times throughout history. There's many that are slain. And if you want to look at it, even I've made this comparison on X. You could see Obama is almost your modern Praetorian prefect. Like, maybe he might not be in power ostensively, but he's pulling a lot of the strings behind the scenes of what happens. He was the last one to endorse Kamala. So it's almost like he was waiting to make sure this is who he wants in. And if this is even who he wants in after the DNC, I don't know. So I think we really
Hmm.
are seeing very similar actions.
Hey guys, this was just a clip of a longer show. Catch the full show by going to KimIversonShow.com. It is free. It airs Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. You could go back now and watch this full interview. I highly recommend it. Again, go to KimIversonShow.com. Thank you so much for watching.